Hi, everybody. Good afternoon to you. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Yoram Perry, and I'm the Kay Chair in Israel Studies, the Barbara and Jack Kay Chair in Israel Studies, and the Joe and Alma Gildenhorn Director of the Institute for Israel Studies. This event is one of our many events that we do during the year. It's called the Dubin Lecture. It's the fourth time that we are having it. And it is only just one of our events, our programs. We have a very large program, both academic and non-academic, more public. The institute that was established 4 or 5 years ago is now the fastest growing institute in the United States. Last year we had 500 students who took 15 courses on Israel. In addition to teaching about Israel, we are very much involved in research. We do all sorts of research projects. As a matter of fact, today, if you will see our site, you will see a new research paper, and the title is Israel War Against Smoking. Previously, we had a wonderful research paper on Israeli economy, on Israeli education system. So you are invited to look at the site israelstudies.umd.edu. We are doing a major research which we call Israel 2023. That is to forecast the future of Israel when it reaches the 75th anniversary. And it's done by a group of professors both here and in Israel, looking into the scenarios, different scenarios, what path might Israel choose if some forces are stronger or some other forces are weaker. So this is one aspect, the research. We have begun this year with a new program of graduate studies, and we have here with us the two first graduate students. Where are they? Would you raise up or show you? Get up? They disappeared. They were in the reception. Here she is. Here she is. And we also would like this year to enlarge the number of minor students and to improve the program. And we have some very many goodies for students who would like to join this program. So I urge you, students among you, or if you're not a student and you want to join us, you are welcome to look at the site as well. I want to introduce the speaker who will introduce our major speaker. And the one that I want to introduce is a person that I was thinking of her when I read a few days ago about a new book that was published. The book is called The End of Men and the Rise of Women. And I haven't seen the book yet. It just published for 4 or 5 days ago, but I read an article about it, a review. And it says that the gist of the book is that we are entering a period when men are losing their grip, patriarchy is crumbling, and we are reaching the end of 200,000 years of human history and the beginning of a new era in which women are on the rise. Now, why does this happen? Because, I quote, our new economy does not care about physical strength, but instead favors social intelligence, open communication, and ability to sit still and focus. Things that are, at a minimum, not predominantly the province of men. I thought of it when I realized that our College of Arts and Humanities has, as of last year, for the first time, a woman as a dean. So I'm going to present a woman, not a man. Bonnie Thorson-Deal is the first woman who served as a dean of the College of Arts and Humanities. We knew her for years for her pioneering scholarship studying the interaction of race, class, and gender in the United States. She got very many prizes and awards. I'm not going to mention all of them. It will take time from our speaker. As she's a long-time chair of women's studies, Dr. Deal had led women's studies at Maryland to a national prominence, and it's a fact that everybody who is in the field knows that. She is a beloved teacher, an excellent mentor, and a wonderful colleague. In the last year, since she became a dean, we discovered, or at least I discovered, many other wonderful traits that she has, one of which is a vision. She really does have a vision. She is an institutional builder, and we could realize that in a very short period of time. She is a real leader with an unusual organizational ability. And indeed, she does lead the school, the college, to a higher level and a higher academic level, which all of us are so happy with. Without her support, her help, assistance, the Israel Studies program could have not been so successful as it was in the last several years. She does help us a lot. She understands our needs. She understands the vision that we have. And we are very proud and happy to have her with us. She's an excellent teacher, excellent mentor, a wonderful colleague, and it's really a pleasure to work with him. I give you Dr. Deal, please.
Well, no one will ever say that Yoram Perry lacks charm. Thank you for such a lovely introduction. On behalf of the College of Arts and Humanities, I want to welcome you here today and to this event. I want to begin by acknowledging Ambassador and Alma Gildenhorn and thanking them for their support for the Gildenhorn Institute and for the university, and actually for the support for the performing arts, because we're in their room today. If you didn't notice the name of the room that we're in, I want to thank you, and I want to thank Dick and Liz Dubin for their support of this lecture series, and all of those of you who are supporters of Israel Studies, and all of those of you who are interested enough to make time in your schedules to be here because you want to learn more and understand these issues. I thank you for coming out. When Professor Perry and his colleagues planned this event last spring, they anticipated that it would be timely and that the upcoming election would provoke interest. They did not know, however, how current events would move the politics of the Middle East and Israel further into the center of broad public discourse about the presidential election. Each day, new stories break, and each day the candidates and their surrogates restate and refine their positions in an effort to affirm their foreign policy credentials and commitments. Actually, perspicacity and timeliness are hallmarks of the work of the Gildenhorn Institute for Israel Studies. The Institute brings to campus outstanding speakers, teachers, and events to thoughtfully engage and expose our students, faculty, staff, and friends to a wide variety of views and expertise on Israeli history, culture, religion, and politics. In addition, the Institute is a major participant in programs and curricula on the Middle East, giving strength and depth to the college's growing expertise in this field. With its large number of undergraduate students, its new graduate programs, its publications, and deep commitment to both academic and applied policy research, the Gildenhorn Institute for Israel Studies is rapidly becoming a major intellectual force, not just on this campus, but in the region, the nation, and globally. Part of the stated mission of the College of Arts and Humanities is a commitment to vigorous intellectual debate in a diverse community and to the value of interdisciplinary approaches to major issues and ideas. Our understanding of and ability to address the challenges in the Middle East today and the future of Israel itself will grow out of this willingness to participate in such sometimes difficult discussions with people from many different fields, conveying our views with respect and listening to the arguments of others with equal regard. When we gather together to wrestle with the multifaceted issues facing us, we both affirm and extend what happens in the classroom. So as dean, I'm proud of the college's role in fostering campus-wide dialogue of such compelling topics through our annual Dean's Lecture Series and through this very special event today, the Dubin Lecture. This lecture series is a vital means of helping us to fulfill our mission. And as part of this series, the Gildenhorn Institute for Israel Studies has hosted a wide range of prominent speakers to help us think creatively about seemingly intractable issues in the Middle East. Past speakers have included Washington Post columnist David Ignatius and Israeli Ambassador Michael Oren. This afternoon, it's my pleasure to introduce the 2012 speaker, Mr. Chris Wallace. During his distinguished journalism career, Chris Wallace has received 3 Emmys and a Peabody Award. Since 2003, he has been the host of the public affairs program Fox Sunday News, and previously, Mr. Wallace worked at ABC News for more than a decade, where he served as senior correspondent for Primetime Thursday, an occasional host of Nightline. In addition, Mr. Wallace has worked at NBC News, where he was chief White House correspondent from 1982 to 1989. And while at NBC, he covered the 1980, the 1984, and 1988 presidential campaigns, as well as the Democratic and Republican conventions during those years. So he has a lot to say about presidential politics. He has also served as the moderator of Meet the Press and anchor of NBC Nightly News Sunday. So this afternoon, Mr. Wallace will discuss the current presidential election and its implications for U.S.-Israeli relations. With the election only 7 weeks away and the first nationally televised debate in just 13 days, we look forward to his timely and informative remarks. So please join me in welcoming our distinguished guest this evening, Mr. Chris Wallace.
Thank you, Bonnie, for that lovely introduction. You read it just about the way I wrote it. I'm going to try to keep my remarks brief today because I know how these events can be, especially for any of you who had a big lunch today. In fact, Ronald Reagan liked to tell a story about ancient Rome. It happens in the Colosseum. The gladiators are there, and a bunch of hungry lions are turned loose, and one of the gladiators goes over to the lions and whispers something, and suddenly all the lions lie down and go to sleep. As you can imagine, the crowd in the Colosseum is absolutely furious. They're shaking their fists and howling with rage, and Caesar sends for the man to be brought to the imperial box, and when he gets there, he asks him, "What did you say to those lions?" And the gladiator says, "I just told them that after they ate, there'd be speeches." Washington is certainly a town with a tough sense of humor. They make jokes about everything here. Of course, the big story right now is that video of Romney talking to big contributors about the 47% of Americans who don't pay any income taxes. Then Romney said to them, "But enough about me." You know, all these political strategists have been trying to figure out why Romney can't seem to get his message out, and the answer is, it's hard to talk when you have both a silver spoon and a foot in your mouth. People are still talking about the 2 political conventions. As you know, they had to move President Obama's speech from the Bank of America football stadium indoors to the arena where the Charlotte Bobcats play basketball. They said it was because of the threat of bad weather, but whatever the reason, they had to move from a big venue to a much smaller place, just like a lot of homeowners over the last 4 years. Once they made the move, they had a huge lighting problem in the hall. They worked on it all day. Whatever they tried, they still couldn't get President Obama out of Bill Clinton's shadow. There was another big story last week. Computer hackers claimed to have stolen Mitt Romney's tax returns, and they said that unless Romney paid them $1 million, they were going to leak them to the press. True story. Romney looked at this, he said, "This is such an unethical money-making operation that I'm quite impressed. In fact, I could have used these guys at Bain Capital." Incidentally, in the interest of being a full-service speaker, I also have a weather forecast for you today. It is 82 and cloudy, just like Clint Eastwood. Obama's approval rating has fallen to a new low. Unemployment is still too high. Gas prices are skyrocketing. But there is some good news for the president. His fantasy football team is looking strong. There are many explanations for the weak recovery, but almost everyone agrees the housing market is still struggling. It's tough all over. In fact, bin Laden's compound in Pakistan, he finally got the mortgage paid off. He's still underwater. Think about it, underwater, get it? But Democrats know how to fight back. They love to poke fun at former President George W. Bush's intellect. They told the story of Bush and Vice President Cheney going to lunch together, and Bush tells the waitress he'd like a quickie. And she says to him, Mr. President, I am so disappointed. You were supposed to bring honor and integrity back to the White House. And Cheney, looking very exasperated, turns to Bush and says, how many times do we have to go over this? It's pronounced quiche. I want to talk today about where we are right now in the presidential campaign, looking ahead to the big debates in October and with just under 7 weeks till Election Day. Then I want to talk about the wave of violence against American interests across the Islamic world, and especially that savage attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi that killed 4 brave Americans. And I want to talk about the media, because we have become just as controversial as any politician. And I promise to be quick about it. As Henry VIII said to each of his wives, I won't be keeping you long. But let's start with the state of the presidential race as we sit here today. And the headline is, whether you like it or not, that Barack Obama has moved out to a small but real lead. Now, the polls vary. The granddaddy of all polls, Gallup, does what they call a 7-day rolling average, and after a 7-point swing towards Obama during the conventions, it now has the president once again leading Romney by just a single point, 47% to 46%. Whatever bounce Obama got out of the Democratic convention seems to have disappeared, at least according to the Gallup poll. But most other polls show Obama beginning to open up that small but steady lead. The new Wall Street Journal poll, just out yesterday, now has the president with a 5-point advantage among likely voters, 50% to 45%. And Mr. Obama has an even bigger lead in electoral votes, and in the end, that's all that really counts. Remember, you need 270 electoral votes to be elected president. My colleague, Karl Rove, who was the chief strategist for George W. Bush, has put together an electoral map based on local public polls, and it now shows states with 225 of the 270 needed, 225 electoral votes solid or leaning Obama, and states with 191 electoral votes solid or leaning Romney. That leaves 9 toss-up states with 122 electoral votes up for grabs. But all 9 of those states voted for Obama 4 years ago, and he has a small lead in 8 of the 9 states right now, so he has a much clearer path to victory than Romney does. There's also a growing sense among political insiders that Democrats had a much more successful convention than the Republicans did, and that the president starts these 7 final weeks ahead. Why? I think for several reasons, and let's start with Romney and the GOP. I can tell you from spending a good deal of time, not only with his top advisors, but also with Romney himself, that they have had a steady theory of this contest for months now. They see it as a referendum on President Obama's stewardship of the economy. Has he done a good job dealing with the economic mess that he stepped into? Are you better off than you were 4 years ago? They felt if they could convince voters the answer to both of those questions is no, that all they had to do was reassure folks that Romney was a credible alternative, a safe choice to lead the country for the next 4 years, and they were home free. It hasn't turned out to be quite that simple. Americans are certainly convinced the economy is a mess when pollsters ask them, is the country on the right track? Is it headed in the right direction? About a third of voters say yes, and 2/3 of voters say no. But they are not sure that this president is responsible for that mess. and they are not yet convinced that they would be better off with Mitt Romney. Let's deal with those two questions separately. According to the polls, more Americans still blame President Bush, still, 4 years in, still blame President Bush than President Obama for our economic troubles. Some of you may have grown tired of President Obama almost 4 years into office, still talking about the mess he inherited, but there's a reason he says it. A lot of voters believe it, and the constant reinforcement from the president only hardens that view. That's why Bill Clinton was such an effective character witness for Mr. Obama at the Democratic Convention. My guess is if Clinton's name were on the ballot this year in November, he could beat both of these guys by a landslide. The days when we had a balanced budget, in fact, were running a surplus, when the economy was creating 23 million jobs and the unemployment rate was under 5%, those days are looking pretty good right now. Which brings us to Clinton's speech at the convention. He talked about how he faced the same thing in 1995 that Obama does now. He said the economy was still weak, but his policies were starting to take effect and would, in his second term, lead to the longest peacetime expansion since World War II. And then Clinton said this: President Obama started with a much weaker economy than I did. Listen to me now. No president, not me, not any of my predecessors, no one could have fully repaired all the damage that he found in just 4 years. In other words, what he was saying was, give Obama more time. For a lot of voters who were still conflicted about who's responsible for our weak recovery, it was like the good housekeeping seal of approval, and you don't often associate Bill Clinton and good housekeeping. Now, a lot of the so-called pundits wondered what would happen when the August jobs report came out the next day, less than 10 hours after President Obama finished speaking and giving his acceptance speech. And the numbers were bad. 96,000 jobs created. The unemployment rate dropped from 8.3 to 8.1%. But that was because 368,000 Americans stopped looking for work. The percentage of Americans now in the labor force is now 63.5%. That is the lowest since 1981. In fact, if workforce participation was where it was now, was today where it is, where it was when Obama took office 4 years ago, the unemployment rate would be 11.2%. Pretty devastating. But the numbers apparently had zero effect on Obama's standing. And that's the question, and it's a question that puzzles an awful lot of the political chattering class. Why hasn't the weak recovery been more of a problem for this White House? I have a couple of theories. First, as I said, a lot of people still think that Mr. Obama is digging out of the mess created by George W. Bush. Or they blame the Republicans in Congress, who have much lower numbers on handling the economy than this president does. But I think there's some other things going on here as well. First, we've been living with bad jobs numbers for years now. I think many voters have become numb to them. So just like the stock market tends to discount bad news it's been expecting for a long time, I think 368,000 people leaving the job force in a single month, as shocking as that seems, doesn't hit us the way it used to. We've come to expect it. And then there's the other big factor. Do voters think things would be better under Mitt Romney? Remember, I said the Romney strategy was to try to turn this into a referendum on the Obama record. But they realized they've got to convince voters that the governor is a credible alternative. Well, the Obama camp also realizes that, and they're doing everything they can to make this not a referendum, but a choice election, not up or down on the president, but Obama versus Romney. Who do you trust more to lead the country, to handle the economy? And they've done a very effective job of roughing up the challenger. Since Romney, in effect, wrapped up the Republican nomination back in April, the Obama camp has been going after him hard. Remember, Romney had to spend tens of millions of dollars to win the primaries, while Obama could build up and sit on his war chest. Once it became clear that Romney was the opponent, the president's men carpet-bombed him with months and millions of dollars of television ads, while Romney was husbanding what little money he had left until he formally accepted the nomination the last week in August, and he could start spending money that he had raised for the general election. And what did the Obama folks do? They painted Romney as a rich, unfeeling corporate raider who doesn't care about middle-class families, and frankly, they had plenty of targets: Bain Capital, Romney's tax returns. The effect of all this is that Romney's favorability numbers cratered this summer by almost 20 points. More people had an unfavorable impression of Mitt Romney than a favorable impression. According to one of the polls, Romney came out of his convention with the lowest favorability rating of any nominee in more than 20 years, which is why he went into the Tampa convention with a lot of work to do. The week before the convention, as part of a charm offensive, the Romneys invited me to spend a morning with them at their home in New Hampshire, where they made pancakes for the family and me on camera. Now, I know I'm great company, and Lord knows I bring a good appetite to the table, but the sudden interest in feeding me was clearly an effort to humanize Romney, to make him look more sympathetic. And it continued at the convention. Ann Romney gave an effective speech talking about her husband's compassion and strong feelings for the country. I thought Romney also gave a good speech. He talked about all the women he appointed to his cabinet when he was governor. He went after the disappointed Obama voters who voted for the president back in 2008 and are now on the bubble. He told them this: "You know, there is something wrong with the job he has done as president when the best feeling you had was the day you voted for him." And he tried to puncture the Obama rhetoric with this line: "President Obama promised to begin to slow the rise of the oceans and to heal the planet. My promise is to help you and your family." All good stuff, but it didn't, according to the polls, close the empathy gap. According to the polls, voters still think by a wide margin that this president cares more about people like them, understands what they are going through, than feel that way about Mitt Romney. And that brings us to the video of the Romney fundraiser last May, which surfaced this week, in which the governor tells big donors that the government has divided this country into makers and takers. He said that 47% of Americans will vote for Obama, quote, no matter what. And here's how he defined them, quote, "There are 47% who are with him, who are dependent upon government, who believe that they are victims, who believe the government has a responsibility to care for them, who believe that they are entitled to health care, to food, to housing, to you name it." Romney concluded, "And so my job is not to worry about those people. I'll never convince them they should take personal responsibility and care for their lives." There's a lot to say about this. First of all, even in a private fundraiser that you think is off the record, it is remarkably dumb. You do not write off half the electorate, half of your fellow Americans. You can't win 99% of all remaining voters, so you have to find a way to reach out. Second, Romney was just wrong. So many of the people in his 47% are not just potential Republican voters, they are Republicans. Romney conflated the 46% of Americans who pay no federal income tax and the 49% who receive government benefits. In those two groups are seniors living on Social Security, folks who receive Medicare benefits after a lifetime of paying into the system, former military who get VA benefits, and a lot of white working-class folks who qualify for the earned income tax credit that was supported and built by Ronald Reagan. There are millions of voters in that group who don't consider themselves victims, who don't feel entitled, and who know all about taking personal responsibility for their lives. I don't know how damaging that video is going to be to Romney. We haven't seen enough polling since the story broke late Monday, but it clearly isn't good news, and it certainly feeds into the Democratic narrative that Romney is out of touch. There is one way, however, in which I believe this could be a plus for the Romney camp. There is growing frustration in GOP circles that Romney has been sticking to this Obama referendum strategy for too long, that he has failed to make a positive case for himself. The video blunder almost forces him now to try to turn this into a choice election, two competing visions for the country. And here's what Romney said Tuesday to my colleague Neil Cavuto. "We have two very different views of America. The president's view is one of a larger government. I think a society based on a government-centered nation where government plays a larger and larger role, redistributes money. That's the wrong course for America." No Republican is going to tell you the Romney video is a good thing, a plus for the campaign, because it isn't. but it may have the unintended consequence of forcing a cautious candidate to finally make this race about big things. More important, we still have 4 debates in October, 3 presidential and 1 vice presidential. I moderated a number of GOP primary debates last year, and Romney, I can tell you from being up close on the stage with him, can be very effective, especially when he has his sights set on one target. Just think back to how his combination of sharp attacks in the debates and then negative ads took down Rick Perry and Newt Gingrich in the primaries. Now, the Romney camp talks about, wishes for, the same thing with Barack Obama. I think it could happen, but I think that Romney has a lot of work to do in these next 2 weeks before the first debate. People believe that Romney can turn around the economy, but they're not convinced he will make things better for them. Maybe for big business, maybe for his rich corporate pals, but not for them. And the new video only adds to that perception. That's why I think that Romney has to do something big in these next 2 weeks. His tax plan is to cut everyone's tax rates 20% across the board and then make up for all that lost revenue by closing loopholes and ending some tax deductions. But Romney has refused to say which loopholes he will close, probably because most of those loopholes, things like the mortgage interest deduction and charitable contributions, are very popular. And in the absence of any concrete proposals from him, the Obama campaign says that Romney's rich friends will get a big tax cut, while middle-class families will pay $2,000, middle-class families, $2,000 more a year on average. I think what Romney needs to do in these next 2 weeks is to put some meat on the bones of his tax reform plan. He needs to say, I will eliminate or limit this deduction, that loophole for people making over a certain amount of money, say $250,000, while keeping those deductions for the middle class. He has said he intends to maintain the progressivity of the tax code, but he's got to make it more real. If you make this much money, along with lower tax rates, you're going to lose these loopholes you've really come to depend on. Wealthy people are going to share the pain of getting our fiscal house in order. Somehow, some way, he has got to counter the image that he's Robin Hood in reverse, who wants to take from the poor and give to the rich. I don't think he can just count on the poor economy to get him over the top. We've had a weak recovery for years now, and it hasn't been enough. Obama is still leading. I think Governor Romney has to do something big and soon to get voters to rethink how they feel about him and whether or not they're willing to give a new man the top job. Finally, last week, national security, foreign policy, became an issue in the presidential campaign, and it's about time, because while it's understandable that the candidates and voters are focused on the economy and the millions of folks who can't find full-time work, America is, in case you forgot, still a country at war, with tens of thousands of brave young men and women on the front lines and Islamic jihadists still in the shadows, still looking for some way to hit us. We were reminded of that fact, if we ever forgot it, last Tuesday, the 11th anniversary of 9/11, when angry Arab protesters stormed our embassy in Cairo, and then the violence spread. By Wednesday morning, we had learned the worst: the sacking of the U.S. consulate in Benghazi and the slaughter of those 4 young, brave Americans, including the U.S. ambassador to Libya, Chris Stevens. I have been struck this last week by the Obama administration's reaction to the violence. Although there were protests and attacks against American interests in more than 24 countries across the Islamic world, White House spokesman Jay Carney had this explanation: this is not a case of protests directed at the United States writ large or at U.S. policy. This is in response to a video that is offensive, Carney was referring, of course, to that obscure trailer on the internet of a movie that has never apparently fully been made that insults the Prophet Muhammad. We had Susan Rice, the American ambassador to the United Nations, on Fox News Sunday last weekend, and in my typically gentle fashion, I asked this question about Carney's statement. You don't really believe that, do you? Rice's response: Chris, I absolutely believe that. In fact, I think it's the case. She went on to say that just as with Salman Rushdie's book, Satanic Verses, or the Danish cartoons of Muhammad, this wave of violence was all about the video. And when I suggested to the ambassador that part of the problem, big part, might be U.S. policies, since President Obama took office, Rice flatly rejected that as, quote, just false. You may remember the president came in with a bold plan for a reset of U.S. relations with the Muslim world. In his Cairo speech in June of 2009, he called for a, quote, new beginning in the relationship. He said the trauma of 9/11 led us to act contrary to our ideals and promised to, quote, change course. And the focus of this fresh start was to be a new engagement with both our allies and our enemies. How has that worked out? Well, the president clearly has some successes to brag about. He has conducted the war on terror aggressively and effectively, launching many more drone strikes than President George W. Bush ever did, and of course taking down Osama bin Laden. But that wasn't the point of the Cairo speech. The president was saying that Bush acted like the bully boy of the Middle East, and he would be a much better partner. It hasn't worked out that way. Let's be honest, once the Arab Spring started last February, things were always going to get more complicated for U.S. foreign policy. The American president, any American president, was no longer going to be able to call up his friendly dictator and say, hey, Hosni, stop those demonstrations in the street and protect American interests. Democracies replaced dictators, and Islamic groups were now free to take to the street and protest. But critics of this administration say Barack Obama has made it clear that he is disengaging from the region, that he is pulling out. And as a result, according to the critics, our allies no longer trust us and our enemies no longer fear us. Let's take a few examples. President Obama pulled U.S. forces out of Iraq in compliance with the Status of Forces Agreement negotiated by George W. Bush. But it had always been anticipated that there was going to be a follow-on agreement, in that some U.S. forces, around 20,000, would stay in that country as part of a long-term relationship. Now, there are no U.S. troops in Iraq, and Iran is increasing its influence in Baghdad at the same time that Sunni violence is resuming in the western part of the country. Afghanistan. The insider attacks are now so widespread that this week the Pentagon suspended all joint operations between U.S. and Afghan forces, all joint operations, because we don't trust the Afghan military and police not to turn their weapons on us. The whole point of our mission over the next 2 years is to train up the Afghans to take on the Taliban after we leave in the end of 2014. That's going to be hard to do if we're unwilling to put any American soldiers in the field with Afghan forces. Israel. On Sunday, Ambassador Rice, in my interview with her, once again said the overall relationship between our two countries is, quote, unprecedented. It has never been stronger. But if it hadn't been for the attacks in Cairo and Benghazi, we would have paid much more attention to the extraordinary comments from Prime Minister Netanyahu last week when he said this: those in the international community who refuse to put red lines before Iran don't have the moral right to put a red light before Israel. President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu held their midnight phone call last week to try to patch things up, but the divide is deep and real. Netanyahu believes that Iran is on the path to a nuclear weapon that poses an existential threat to Israel and is fast approaching a zone of immunity when Israel, at least, will no longer be able to stop them. And the Prime Minister is still not convinced that this president has his back. Which brings us to Iran. Mr. Obama came in pledging to engage the mullahs to have direct talks without preconditions. Almost 4 years later, I think it's fair to say that that outreach has been a dismal failure. The Iranians have continued their nuclear program, while the U.S. has persuaded the European community to impose tough sanctions on Iran and that are clearly beginning to hurt the economy. They have not stopped the Iranians from building more and more centrifuges and continuing to enrich uranium. And all the talk about isolating Tehran has failed completely. Just last month, you may have missed it, Iran held a summit of 120 non-aligned nations. Despite our pleas to our allies to boycott, the leaders of Afghanistan, Egypt, and Iraq all attended, and so did Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations. Last Sunday, in addition to Ambassador Rice, we also had Congressman Mike Rogers, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, on the program, and he offered a very different analysis of the situation than Ambassador Rice. He said he did not believe the violence was all about the video. He said his sources tell him al-Qaeda is clearly using that recording to incite violence. He also said a senior Middle East intelligence official had asked him recently, "What is your country's policy for the region, because there is no U.S. leadership?" Rogers went on, "The countries in the Middle East believe there is a disengagement policy by the United States, and that lack of leadership on what our position is causing problems." Rogers said, "We must take a stronger stance in the region. We must make it clear we have interests we will defend, and that we must condition new foreign aid on countries promoting and protecting those interests. If we fail to do all that," he said, "we will see many more attacks on U.S. property and personnel in that very tough part of the world." I'd like to conclude, and we're going to do some question and answer, by talking a little bit about the media, because I know that many of you have deep reservations about us. You think we're too liberal, or in the case of Fox News, maybe you think we're too conservative. You think that we either get our facts wrong or we make them up. And you think that especially in television we distort the news by trying to fit it into our time limitations. Well, I just want to assure you that we're aware of some of those problems too. In fact, I like to tell the story at ABC that if David Brinkley had been around during biblical times, he would have begun his newscast one night by saying, "Good evening. Moses came down from the mountain today with 10 commandments from the Lord God Almighty. Here now is a report on the two most important." Well, let's see if I can deal with some of the doubts that people have about us in the news media. When I considered coming over from ABC 8 years ago, I did something that most critics of Fox News never do. I actually watched it. And what I found was that across the broadcast day, the vast majority of Fox News reporting is straight, even-handed, and very watchable. During the last presidential campaign on Fox, you heard every nasty thing the Democrats said about John McCain. Back in 2000, it was Fox that broke the story that George W. Bush had a DUI arrest years before, and they broke that on the final weekend of the campaign. More important is the job we do every day telling the news in an aggressive, compelling way, whether it's politics or the disorder, the disarray in the Middle East, and we do it with a fraction of the resources of the big broadcast networks. Now, I know some of you are saying, wait a minute, what about Bill O'Reilly? What about Sean Hannity? No question about it, they're conservatives, and proudly so. But I would submit that those are opinion shows and openly labeled as such. No one would suggest that they are straight news reports, and while they're both very popular, they are not what the basic mission of Fox News is all about. I want to make one final point about fair and balance, and this came as an eye-opener to me. I thought, coming from a traditional broadcast network, ABC, that we were fair and balanced. But since moving to Fox, I've come to see things a little differently. I think there are some unexamined assumptions in the mainstream media, some ideas that are accepted as givens. There's a widely shared sense that liberal positions on such issues as the environment and gun control, gay marriage, and abortion are the conventional wisdom. More conservative positions are seen as conservative positions. There's a widespread belief in the media that government programs always solve problems and that taxes on corporations and the wealthy are good ways to cut deficits and don't put a drag on the economy. I'm not saying those ideas are right or wrong. What I'm saying is that they're accepted by most of the media as the baseline without examination. Well, at Fox News, we say everything gets examined, liberal ideas as well as conservative. No one gets a free pass. What could be healthier? But you know, tough is the criticism that all of us in the media may get. I can't help but feel that in some ways these controversies are good for us. Over the years, the media has gotten a little too self-righteous. We're busy criticizing presidents and popes, but feel we're above criticism. We're immediately always suspicious of every public official. Well, criticism can teach journalists some humility. That is never a very pleasant lesson, but it sure can be a good one. I feel proud and privileged to be a reporter. It's been a ticket for me to be an eyewitness to history, and it's an honor to bring the news to the American people. Someone is always going to be mad at us, and sometimes we will make mistakes, but the Founding Fathers knew what they were doing when they put freedom of the press in the Constitution. Our job is to live up to that responsibility. Thank you all so much. So we're going to have a little conversation.
Sit over there. Thank you, Chris, so much for the very interesting speech. We really enjoyed it. I didn't know that you can take a position of one of the late night programs. So many jokes in the beginning. Wonderful. I really enjoyed it. But we have plenty of time for questions, and I'm sure that there are many questions that people would like to ask. We'll give some preference to the students. So who is the first?
First of all, thank you so much for coming. Quick announcement before I ask my question. Molly and I will be holding a discussion about this for students just to kind of digest the conversation. We'll be standing out back, so anybody is welcome to join. I do have a question for you.
Where are you going to do it here?
Yeah, we'll probably just go outside.
All right. You see, they're going already to analyze your speech. Excellent students. We have very good students. Will there be a...
I'm not going to get out of here before that happens, but go ahead.
There might be an exam after that. Maybe you'll talk to the mic, please.
Yeah, good. Yeah, why don't we, people, if they want to ask questions,
Right.
the two mics.
Yes, please do that. And over there as well.
So, I actually last week had the opportunity to hear from the former commander of the IDF, General Danny Khalutz, who spoke pretty passionately about his disdain for Netanyahu's suggestion that the United States should impose red lines. So specifically, given the tremendous divide, even in the Israeli intelligence and military communities, about the actions that ought to be taken towards Iran, what do you think that this particular administration should have been doing differently?
Well, let me take it from both points of view. First of all, from the Israeli point of view, I think that Netanyahu is playing a very high-risk, some might even say dangerous game. On the one hand, I give him, and I've known Netanyahu, Bibi, since the 1980s in New York. On the one hand, I give him I believe that he believes what he says and that he sees Iran as an existential threat. And I think, although, as you say, there's a wide difference of opinion as to how close Iran really is and whether they've actually even made the decision to develop a nuclear weapon, I fully sympathize. If you're the leader of a country and job one is to protect that country, and in Israel the idea of protecting it from another Holocaust is clearly seared into your consciousness, I take his concern and zeal about doing that very seriously. On the other hand, there are an awful lot of people, both in the United States and in Israel, who feel that he is playing a very heavy hand in the American political campaign. And that if Obama wins, not that Obama is going to turn his back on Israel, it's too important geopolitically and politically, but that he is, if there's a choice, a marginal choice, an incremental choice between doing Netanyahu a favor or not doing him a favor, he's not going to feel any particular need to do him a favor. From Obama's point of view, it's a tough one, and part of it is you begin to say the intelligence, but the intelligence assumes a level of certitude that we have seen, with great reliability over and over in the last decade, from the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq to the question of whether or not Iran has a nuclear program or stopped it, and they've had different national intelligence estimates which have said different things. I don't think the president can or should be bullied, in effect, by Netanyahu into making a decision and setting a red line that he doesn't feel is appropriate. On the other hand, I think he clearly has to listen, and obviously the history of Mossad intelligence is probably better than the history of the intelligence of the CIA.
May I add on that? You covered so many elections, presidential elections. Would you say that the issue of Israel is more central in these elections because of the Israeli government's attitudes than in the past?
Yes, I would say yes, because one, Netanyahu has forced it onto the agenda. In addition, because of the stakes that are involved. I mean, it had not often been the case where Israel and its posture played such a direct and obvious life and death role. Post 9/11, that part of the world, it used to be, in the old days, we had a nice simple relationship with the Russians, and that was the key life or death issue for American presidents and potential presidents when it came to foreign policy. Now it's the Middle East, and now it's especially Iran and the possibility of their getting a nuclear weapon. So Iran's nuclear stance, Israel's attitude towards it, the possibility that Israel may strike, and clearly, I mean, I don't think there's any question that one of the things that Netanyahu is doing is he has leverage now that he will not have the day after the election when either Romney or Obama is elected. So he's trying to use that to maximum benefit now. And part of that is the implied threat that in the next 7 weeks, he could launch a unilateral strike, which would have not only huge geopolitical and foreign policy and national security implications, but because of oil, could have enormous economic implications as well. So I would have to say that Israel and Iran and that part of the world is playing a more central role in this election than any I can remember in recent history.
And therefore, it made the issue of Israel and other states in the Middle East less a bipartisan issue that it was in the past?
Well, yes and no. I think that the support for Israel is bipartisan, and I think the desire not to have Iran get a nuclear weapon is bipartisan. There's nobody who is saying throw Israel to the wolves or, you know, we can contain a nuclear Iran. It's just that there are differences in policy about how to achieve both of those things.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I'm going to flip the script on you a little bit. This is coming from a pretty conservative guy, so I'm going to say that this is probably a one-sided question, and I recognize that. But
I ask them all the time, don't worry about it.
There you go, right? One thing I haven't understood about the election, you were talking about how Governor Romney hasn't, you know, he's made this referendum on President Obama, and he hasn't made this about, you know, big ideas and big topics. And one thing that I think President Obama has done well is he's talked about how the middle class is shrinking, but what he hasn't talked about is how the poverty level is at an all-time high. I know the last report I saw was 15.2, 15.3%. And I don't understand why, like, the Republicans and conservatives in general haven't pushed the growing poverty class to a bigger thing. You know, they're saying every time, you know, you're looking at these jobs reports, they're falling, but poverty rates are at an all-time high, and that's not something that's almost getting covered ever on, you know, on any kind of TV.
I'm not sure. Let me make a couple of points. One, I'm not sure I agree that it hasn't been covered, and Lord knows Romney has talked about that there are many more millions of Americans on food stamps than ever before. You know, I don't think that Obama is winning because people don't understand the economy stinks. I think people fully understand that. And, you know, as I say, when you ask them, is the country on the right track or the wrong track? Now, it ticked up a little bit after the Democratic convention, and they think they did a pretty good selling job, particularly Clinton. But I think that's not the problem. The problem from Romney's point of view isn't that people think that, is that they haven't been given enough of a reason. You know, the fire Obama part of the equation, I think a lot of people get. The higher Romney part of the equation, I'm not sure they get. And, you know, I'll take a couple of examples. I mean, tax reform. I mean, it is the holy grail of conservative economic philosophy. You know, it's what Bowles Simpson was all about. You lower the tax rates, you do away with a lot of the, you know, $1 trillion in tax expenditures every year for a variety of tax deductions and loopholes, and you use at least some of that money to one, to pay for lowering the rates, and two, perhaps to shrink the deficit. That there's a difference on. Romney is for that, but he refuses to give a single tax deduction he would eliminate. Why? I find that astonishing, and it seems to me, for a guy who's being portrayed as he's much more concerned about his wealthy friends at the fundraiser in Boca Raton than he is about Joe Sixpack, why not say, you know, I'm going to take away this, or I'm going to take away that, and you're going to feel pain. Yes, your tax rate is going to go from 35% to 28%, but you know that big deduction you got for your vacation house or this or that, you're going to lose it. And it seems to me that would give him a lot more credibility to make that argument. So I think and again, I think he's felt, I don't have to do that because all I have to do is say I'm a credible alternative and this other guy stinks. It hasn't worked. He's got to bring more to the game, I think, and he has to do it in a hurry.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Thank you for coming. I have a question. You mentioned that Governor Romney hasn't put forth any actual tax reductions that you were looking at, or in general, given out too many policy proposals. I was wondering, what if Governor Romney is elected president, what you think a Romney presidency would look like? Would it look more like the governor that we saw in Massachusetts, or more like the nominee that we see on the campaign trail?
It's a very good question, and the answer is nobody knows. I mean, seriously, you know, because Romney has evolved over the years. My guess is he would be more moderate and less, and it's only a guess. I mean, I don't want to, you know, but I think he would be more moderate because I think the problems that the country faces are such that they would force him to have to look at accommodation. I didn't ask the question, but it was a good question. In the debate in Ames, Iowa in August of last year, when my colleague Bret Baier asked the 10 Republicans who are up in if you had a deal, a budget deal, and it was $10 of spending cuts for $1 of tax increases, would you accept that? And not one of them raised their hand. Well, what a bunch of damn fools. I mean, if you could get a deal of $10 in spending cuts for $1 in tax increases, you'd be crazy not to take that deal as a way to try to deal with our deficit. So, and do I think that President Romney would be willing to make that deal? Yes.
All right, go ahead.
So if that's such a clear dichotomy, why hasn't Governor Romney pushed more towards that position?
Put more towards what position?
More towards that moderate position. Why aren't Americans demanding to see what it would look like as?
Because he's deathly afraid of being portrayed as a flip-flopper again. I mean, there has been such an evolution in his views that the one thing he will not do is change any position he has taken, even if he was forced to take some of them because of the demands of a tough primary race, a race that he thought was tougher. One quick example, immigration. Any Republican strategist worth his salt will tell you that Republicans have no chance unless they get at least 35% of the Hispanic vote. McCain got 31% in 2008. Because of the Perry and Santorum and Gingrich, he was forced to the right in a position of that millions of people should self-deport, as if 11 million people are suddenly going to go down to Greyhound and get on a bus. But he can't get off that position because to do so is the conservatives would say, you know what, there he goes again.
Yeah. Yes, please. The lady here.
Oh, I think he was first.
It's all right. Doesn't matter. He will come later.
And there's a mic here
Well,
as well.
I'd kind of like to get back to basics, and that is psychology and emotions. And wasn't President Obama elected based a lot on emotions, that people liked him? It wasn't the experience that he brought to the table or anything about what he actually planned to do, but just on hope and change, and that people felt good about that. And that now we're looking at two candidates, and we're being told that Mitt Romney is not likable, and that people perhaps are voting for Obama because of their emotions, that they like him, and that the media chooses what to pick and choose on a picture in the newspaper. So they will show Obama on the front page smiling, and perhaps Mitt Romney on page 18 frowning. And that at the debates with McCain and Obama, when Obama was speaking, the camera was always on Obama's face. When McCain was speaking, the camera was on his face for his first two words, and then on Obama kind of making fun of what McCain was saying. So the media is actually choosing for us who our candidate is that we should elect. It's not all about what they're actually saying, but it's what the media picks and chooses to tell us what they're saying, what's important and what's not, or what's good or bad.
You know what? You're right. And we're going to have a meeting actually a week from today at 21 Club in New York, and we're going to just flip a coin and decide who we're all. No, I'm teasing.
I know.
Look, if you're saying to me that there is a liberal bias in the mainstream media, that's why Fox News exists and why Fox News is so successful. But having said that, over the course of a presidential campaign, people get a fairly accurate sense of these two guys. And I can't say that it's all the creation of, they took one picture here of this guy or one picture there of that. I think that undersells the intelligence of American voters. There's no question that an awful lot of why they went for Obama in 2008 was emotion, was hope. You know, we were fed up with our politics, and he seemed to represent turning the page. And quite frankly, I think most people would agree, John McCain, while a great American and a great patriot, was not the most inspiring, future-oriented candidate the Republicans had ever come up with. You know, if it had been Ronald Reagan against Barack Obama, it would have been a very different outcome. But it wasn't. And so that happened. And one of the interesting things, talking about that emotion, is, you may have noticed this in some of the Romney ads, they will say, it's okay, you were disappointed, we understand, but it's time to change. And what they are finding, that a lot of the Obama voters went for him with this sort of love affair and are disappointed in him, but don't kind of want to give up on him. And so that they're having to do a kind of emotional, like, you know, let's break the bond here in addition to just the issues. But you know, the idea that the media scripts all this, in the end, we get the president we deserve usually. And sometimes that's a bad thing as well as a good thing.
Thank you. Yes, please.
I'm a fellow at the journalism school, and I'm from Hungary, actually. That's why my accent. And my question is also about Romney, because you mentioned a few times in your speech that you met him, you spent some time with him, you even ate his pancake. And I was.
Did he say spanking or pancakes?
No, pancake.
There was no spanking involved.
Sorry.
Pancakes, yes. Yeah, buttermilk pancake.
Yeah, I mean, if there was any spanking, I'm curious about that. And then I would like to go on record.
Get this man's name.
Okay, so I was wondering, I mean, what your impressions were when he was off camera, because judging by what you see on camera and what you saw in the debates, you could really have the sense that he was like really, he would do whatever he needs to get elected. I mean, he even had this comment that when he was accused of hiring illegals, that I'm running for office for Pete's sake or something like that. So I don't know what your personal impressions were.
I would say, and it's interesting because I've thought about this a lot, he's a much more interesting, much more three-dimensional character off camera than on character. I've noticed that a lot about a bunch of people. I will tell you that the biggest single difference between the public and private, and I say private in quotes because even off camera when they're with reporters, they're not really private, persona that I ever saw was George W. Bush. I'll never forget the first time, after I became the anchor of Fox News Sunday, he would do, and presidents subsequently and before him have done, they will give a lunch for the anchors of all the evening newscasts and the Sunday shows the day of the State of the Union speech to kind of pitch, here's what we're going to be our program for the next year. So they invite about 15 of us to lunch in the family dining room and talk. And I'll never forget, I was with Brit Hume, who was the anchor of the evening news. I was anchoring Fox News Sunday. And he said to me, wait till you see this. And afterwards he said, what do you think? And I said, he's unrecognizable. That Bush was so much more conversant, quick on his feet, detailed, sophisticated in his analysis, and all of the kind of dumb cowboy image that a lot of people had about George W. Bush was totally not accurate. It was what they saw, and it used to cause his staff to tear their hair out, but it wasn't who the real man was. I would, as far as Romney is concerned, he is a much more, much warmer guy. I can't say he's more intelligent because I think he comes off as intelligent in public. I will say there's a goofy quality to him that, and you know, you hear his wife and kids talking about it, that doesn't come across in kind of an endearing, goofy quality. I don't know if you've ever seen any of the National Lampoon Vacation movies, but he reminds me a little bit of Chevy Chase's Clark Griswold sometimes. Now, whether you want that as president is a different question. And we know that on vacation he would have the dog up on the roof.
Thanks. But you'll have to raise your voice.
One short question. I'd like your take on the fact of the promises made by all the candidates over the years in light of the fact that the Constitution says the Congress makes the laws and the President executes.
Did you all hear that? Okay, well, the question basically is, what about all the campaign promises these candidates make, given the Constitution says it's up to Congress to actually make the laws? Well, yes, that's true constitutionally, but there's no question that a president has an enormous impact on the country. I mean, I've thought at various points, Bush, Gore in 2000, I mean, think how different, and you could say better or worse, but think how different the country would have been if Gore had been elected. You know, some people say he was elected, but you know, if he had won the presidency and been sworn in 2001, it would have been an utterly different country. How different it was if, you know, if with Obama winning as opposed to McCain. And you know, this gets back to the whole question of elections have consequences, and you know, whoever wins this election will take us in a dramatically different direction. And yes, they'll have to deal with reality, and you know, Gitmo is still operating, and Obama said he was going to cut the deficit in half, and in fact, he's added 50%. You know, he's increased it by 50%. But it's a very different country, and it will be an extremely different country if Mitt Romney is president than if Barack Obama. I'm not saying better or worse. You have to make that judgment for yourself. But you know, in the end, I think the individual campaign promise is less important because some they can keep and some they can't, but the general direction of where they would take the country. And it'll be different, both nationally and internationally.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Wallace, for being here. My question is in regard to the recent video from 1998, which has been leaked, in which President Obama has been speaking about his support for redistribution of wealth. How do you think that will affect the election? Will the media scrutinize the video as they have scrutinized Romney for his 47% comments?
In case some people don't know, it turns out that as a state senator in 1998, Obama was at a conference at, I think, Loyola University, and he talked about believing in redistribution of income. You know, the answer is it's not as important as the Romney thing for a variety of reasons. First of all, it's 1998. The other one was May. Secondly, Obama's been president for 4 years, so people kind of have a sense of the direction he wants to take the country, and a lot of people will say that comment and his comment about spreading money around to Joe the plumber in the 2008 campaign, and the fact that he wants to raise taxes on the wealthy and not at all, purely on the wealthy and not on the middle class, are all statements of this, you know, a redistributionist philosophy. So I'm not sure it has a lot of shock impact. Most importantly, though, because of the fact that he's been president for 4 years, and in the end, he'll be judged, and that's both positively and negatively, based on his record as president, not what he said as a state senator at a college, you know, on a grainy tape 14 years ago.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
Currently, we're in a time of divided government, with the Republicans controlling the House and the Democrats, the Senate, and the White House. Not a whole lot is getting done with Congress. They call it Do-Nothing Congress. I was wondering if potentially it looks like after coming up in 7 weeks that it could be the same dynamics with the Senate and or with the Democrats retaining the Senate and the White House and the Republicans in the House. Do you see divided government continuing, or do you see Republicans kind of conceding more and working with the president?
Well, I think that you almost either way you're going to have divided government. Let's assume Romney wins, and let's say that the Republicans take the House, continue to keep the House. even if Republicans were to take the Senate, by the wildest expectations, the Democrats would still have plenty of votes, probably 45, 46, to maintain a filibuster, and they would do to the Democrats the Democrats would do to them what they had done to the Democrats for the last few years. So yes, I think you will have divided government. Now, you can talk about the possibility, well, all right, Obama wins, Romney wins, things switch, and people decide, oh, let's get along, and let's try to get something done. But boy, I can't imagine more of a mandate, more of a sweeping vote than what we saw in 2008, when you had Obama win the presidency. Within a short period of time after Specter switched, you had a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate and a huge Democratic majority in the House for those first 2 years, and you still had open warfare. And so no. I mean, the answer is, do I think anything will get done? Yes. Do I think we'll go off the fiscal cliff or tax-mageddon? No, because I think everybody realizes it would be suicidal like the debt limit was last summer. But do I think that there's going to be a huge bipartisan celebration? I wish there were. I wish they'd get some things done and start to address and step up to some of our big problems, but I don't think so.
Thank you.
I see that there are too many people who want to ask questions, and we'll have to stay for another hour at least. So I'm going to get the right for a question to someone of you who wants to ask about the Middle East, Israel, or international relations. Go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate the topic. My question in this regard is regarding to, you speak about how, both parties are bipartisan kind of towards the support for Israel and America's support for Israel, but I'm curious as to your perspective on how the news media supports Israel. And when there's a lot of discussion about either Israeli-Palestinian issues or conflict there, there's a lot of focus on Israel-Iran, but there's also very little focus on Israeli-Palestinian conflict settlement issues right now, and it seems that the media is particularly heavily favoring Israel in terms of the discussion there. And I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
You think the media is favoring Israel?
I think in general, but all the various networks will discuss a lot what's happening to Israel as opposed to what is happening to all people in the region.
Because historically, I'm not sure that I'd agree with that's true. It might be true now, but certainly during the Intifada, I think a lot of the mainstream media was quite pro-Arab. I don't know if you'd agree, and the oppressed Palestinians. The answer is that Israeli, I'm not talking about the Middle East now, but Israeli-Palestinian issues, I think from the point of view of the American media, are kind of invisible because people don't feel that either side is seriously interested in peace. The Palestinians have so many problems amongst themselves, and I think the Palestinians lost a lot of credibility when Sharon pulled out of Gaza, and instead of that causing some moderation among the Palestinians, it probably only caused further extremism with Hamas taking over the Gaza Strip. And as far as the Israelis are concerned, I don't think there's... I've gotten through this so far without getting in trouble, but what the hell? I don't... Despite his talking a big game, I don't see much of an interest on the part of Bibi Netanyahu to sit down with the Palestinians and make some hard decisions. Now, to be honest, you need a partner to do that. I'm not sure he could see a reliable partner in the Palestinians, but I don't think he's straining at the bit to want to have that conversation. So, I mean, the thing that strikes me, not about the Middle East, not about Al-Qaeda or Iran or Afghanistan or, the Arab Spring, but, to a certain degree with the Arab Spring, so much of this has gone by the board now, and Israeli-Arab relations are not nearly as interesting, I think, to most of the media as what's going on inside these Arab states, and the question as to whether or not democracies are going to break out, whether or not the Islamic fundamentalists are going to take over, and if so, will it be in a democratic forum or will it be in a much more repressive forum? And if so, what will that mean? Forget deal with Israel, what's going to happen, for instance, between Egypt and Israel?
Well, I think that this was a fair and balanced answer.
Good.
We'll have to close here. I want to thank you very much for coming and sharing with us your point of view. I apologize for all of those who could not ask questions. I want to thank so many people who help us arranging that, so I won't mention the names. And just for you to know that we don't deal only in our institute with politics and society and history, we do also culture. So the next event that we're going to have is with a very interesting and famous Israeli writer, Ronit Matalon. Have a look at our site and you'll find the dates. Thank you very much. Good evening.